In a shocking midnight frenzy, a picture-perfect family's facade shattered. Fueled by years of hidden rage, the son unleashed a storm of violence so brutal it turned his own home into a battlefield. Screams echoed through the night, neighbors frozen in terror, and by dawn a once peaceful house stood drenched in chaos. A betrayal carved in blood, and a community left forever scarred. Don't forget to like this video, share with friends, and subscribe to Twisted Case File. Every street has a story. Here, behind manicured lawns and pastel curtains, families laugh, argue, and live their lives unseen by the world. But on this street, in this house, a secret was festering, one that would erupt into one of the most shocking family crimes the region had ever known. To neighbors, they were the model family, Thomas and Elaine, hardworking, church-going, pillars of the community. Their only son, Daniel, smart, athletic, accepted into a respected university. Together they projected stability and success. But perfection, as investigators would later say, can be a mask, and masks can crack. They were just normal. Kind people. We had no idea anything was wrong. Looking back now, you try to see signs, but there weren't any. Or maybe we just didn't want to see. Behind closed doors, cracks were forming. Money pressures, late-night arguments muffled through walls. A son increasingly isolated, resentful, and, as prosecutors would later argue, dangerously angry. Thomas had lost a major client at work. Elaine had picked up extra shifts at a local clinic. And Daniel was slipping. Friends say he had begun skipping classes, drinking more, venting about how his parents, quote, controlled everything. It was a cocktail of stress, shame, and rage no one recognized until it was too late. He would rant about them sometimes. Like, really rant. I thought it was just normal teen stuff, you know? But the way he talked, it was like he hated them. Like, deep hatred. In hindsight, the warnings were there. A digital trail of frustration and hostility. A young man seething in silence. A family house becoming less a home and more a pressure cooker. No one could imagine what was coming. Yet in the weeks leading up to the night of horror, the atmosphere inside the house grew electric. Friends recall Elaine looking tired, Thomas appearing distracted, Daniel avoiding eye contact. It was the kind of unease you can't quite name but feel in your bones. And then, as if scripted by some malevolent force, a series of small events aligned. A missed therapy appointment, a heated argument about money, a night when the locks on the bedroom doors would be left undone. The stage was set for betrayal. Each testimony, in isolation, meant little. Together, they painted a chilling mosaic, a family spiraling toward disaster, unseen by all but the shadows in their own home. In documentary terms, it is impossible to show what someone felt in their heart. But investigators later said it was as if Daniel was living inside a storm of resentment and rage. And storms, left unchecked, always break. By early spring, the family's world was a tinderbox. All it needed was a spark. That spark would ignite on a night no one will ever forget. Spring was supposed to bring renewal. But inside the Lawson house, renewal never came. Stress metastasized. Silence became the dominant language. Each day felt like a rehearsal for disaster. The arguments grew more frequent, more vicious. What once were minor disagreements about chores and curfews had evolved into explosive fights about control, money, and betrayal. Neighbors would later testify they could hear shouting from the street. It was like thunder. We'd never heard them like that. I remember telling my husband, something's going to happen in that house. But what do? You shut your windows and hope for the best. Daniel withdrew from his friends. He quit the basketball team. He started writing dark, rambling notes in a private journal, later seized by investigators, describing himself as a, quote, stranger in my own house. Each page was a warning no one read. Each scribble a tick of an unseen clock counting down. She said, he scares me sometimes. And I laughed, like all kids are scary sometimes. Now I wish I hadn't laughed. Elaine sensed the shift, but didn't know how deep it ran. She chalked it up to teenage rebellion, financial pressure, exam stress. She didn't know she was living with a time bomb. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of unspoken words. Investigators later described walking into a place that felt charged, as if the walls themselves remembered the arguments, the slamming doors, the simmering rage. By mid-April, the pressure was unbearable. Police records show 3 separate noise complaints from neighbors. Friends stopped visiting. Even Daniel's social media fell silent, a digital void that investigators now view as the calm before the storm. The last week of April was the tipping point. A confrontation over money, over freedom, over years of resentment boiled over. No one knows the exact words exchanged, but everyone who has studied the case agrees. This was the spark that would ignite a night of unimaginable horror. And then silence, the quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. Midnight, the moment the calendar turned and the night began. Outside, rain slicked the streets. Inside, the Lawson house was still too still. Investigators would later say it was as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then, it happened. There was this scream. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. Not a fight, not a movie scream. It froze me. I turned off my TV just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Within seconds, the family home became a battlefield. Furniture overturned. Doors ripped from hinges. Investigators described the scene as, quote, chaos incarnate. Calls flooded 911 dispatch. Neighbors sobbing, whispering about blood everywhere, and someone losing their mind. By the time the first officers arrived, the quiet cul-de-sac looked like a war zone. What they found inside defied description. One seasoned detective called it the most shocking thing I've seen in 25 years on the job. In a matter of minutes, a son had turned his parents' sanctuary into a nightmare. Blood spatter analysis later showed a frenzy, an eruption of violence so sudden and so intense, it left the rooms looking, in the words of one forensic tech, as though rage had taken physical form. This wasn't a calculated killing. This was an explosion. Years of resentment detonating in one catastrophic moment. By the time sirens pierced the night, Daniel was already gone, sprinting into the rain, his hands trembling. But he couldn't outrun what he'd done. Police found him less than a mile away. Barefoot. Drenched. Clothes streaked with blood. His expression, one officer later said, was vacant. Like the lights were on, but nobody was home. By sunrise, the crime scene unit was working in silence. Neighbors stood behind the tape, hands over their mouths, as if a tornado had touched down on their street and left a wound that would never heal. A quiet street, a loving family, a son consumed by fury, and a single night of unthinkable horror that shattered them all. Morning came, but it did not bring comfort. It brought cameras, investigators, and a community staring at the unthinkable. The house on the corner had transformed overnight from a home into a scene of horror. Inside, technicians worked in silence. Blood pattern analysts, crime scene photographers, and evidence clerks moved like ghosts, documenting every inch. One officer later said, "You could feel it on your skin, the heaviness, like a weight on your chest." I've seen a lot, but that scene, it stays with you. It was like walking into the aftermath of a hurricane, but inside four walls. Less than an hour after the crime, officers spotted Daniel wandering aimlessly along a side street. He was drenched, barefoot, his hands shaking. He did not resist when they approached. In fact, he barely spoke. One officer described it as like arresting a ghost. Another said his eyes were vacant, like he was somewhere else entirely. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, satellite trucks lined the street. Reporters whispered into microphones about a, quote, a double homicide and a, quote, son in custody. Neighbors wept openly. Teachers canceled classes to meet with grief counselors. The town, so proud of its quiet safety, felt violated. We preach forgiveness, but right now people are just trying to understand how a child could do this to his own parents. There's a lot of hurt, a lot of fear. Back at the station, detectives began the painstaking process of questioning Daniel. The official transcripts remained sealed, but sources describe long stretches of silence punctuated by bursts of sobbing. When asked why, he reportedly said only, "I don't know anymore." Meanwhile, the forensics team was reconstructing the night step by step. Blood spatter trajectories, footprints, the position of overturned furniture. Each clue telling part of the story of a rage that boiled over in minutes. Across the region, talk radio hosts debated what went wrong. Was it mental illness? Family conflict? Society at large? Everyone wanted an explanation, but the only person who truly knew sat silent in a jail cell. Days turned to weeks. The home remained sealed off, its windows boarded, its mailbox overflowing with cards and flowers. Inside the courthouse, the wheels of justice began to turn, preparing for a trial that would drag every hidden detail of this tragedy into the light. Months after that night of horror, the quiet town once again found itself under a spotlight. This time, all eyes were on the courthouse, where the son accused of murdering his parents would face justice. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Journalists, family friends, and strangers sat shoulder to shoulder. You could almost feel the collective breath being held. The boy once described as polite and promising now stood as a defendant in a double murder case. Prosecutors called it a, quote, night of unthinkable horror. The defense spoke of mental illness, pressure, and a family in crisis. Each side laid out a story that gripped the courtroom like a thriller. Graphic photographs and harrowing testimony left jurors visibly shaken. Gasps rippled through the gallery as crime scene images were shown. Every new detail added another layer to a tragedy almost too heavy to bear. I've covered a lot of trials, but the tension in that room was unlike anything I've seen. People were crying, clutching each other, It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a reckoning. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned with its decision. In that moment, the entire community seemed to lean forward. The verdict, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp, then silence. Some sobbed, others stared blankly at the floor. Justice, some said. Closure, others hoped. But for many, there would be no true closure, only the knowledge of what had been lost. The trial ended, but the ripples continued. The home where it all began stood empty, a grim monument to what happened behind closed doors. Neighbors passed it quickly, eyes averted. Reporters left. Life resumed, but the street was never the same. This case opened a lot of conversations about mental health, about family conflict, about the signs we miss. People want to make sense of it, to believe it's an anomaly. But it's a reminder. We have to pay attention before tragedy strikes. A family destroyed, a community scarred, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger lives not outside our doors, but within them. This was Blood Betrayal, the son who slaughtered his parents in a night of unthinkable horror. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share with friends, and also subscribe.